We don't mourn. We got a mind of our own. That's right. We can't go wrong if we stand up and be strong.
We are standing up, we are strong. Get ready for another edition of the Live from the Heartland Show. Here we are, Tom Clark, Katie Hogan, myself, Michael James. We are downtown here at the beautiful studios of WLUW, and we got a great show. We're going to talk with our pal Michael Harrington about the Bernie campaign, and we've got Michael Frank from Earwig Records talking about all kind of stuff, including B and Baby Records. Okay, here we go.
Happy day after Valentine's Day.
Oh, sweet Valentine's to both.
And happy Susan B. Anthony's 200th birthday.
How about that?
Yeah. Whoa, there we go.
Sorry about that noise. It told me to pull it down. One more time? Is it good?
Never mind.
Well, all you climate deniers out there, just days after the Earth saw its warmest January on record, Antarctica recorded its warmest temperature in history, 65 degrees, making it the ordinary frigid continent's highest measured temperature in history. Climate change is here, and as Mayor Lightfoot was saying, it's crashing on our shores, trying to get help from the feds and others to preserve our lakefront. It's really something how much it just in the last year this has piled up on us.
Yeah, so significantly they have confirmed with machinery testing it, the water under the ice shelf in Antarctica is the warming influence. The seas that are warmer are causing the break-off of the shelf, the outer edges of it. It is summer in the southern hemisphere, but 65 is still really, really warm for the outer edge of Antarctica. The actual pole is still a lot colder, but the worrisome part is the edges melting off, and they're also looking at what's happening in Greenland as worrisome as anything, as all of the melting that's occurring.
As one of my former neighbors pointed out, a paleontologist, he occasionally goes to Antarctica because he can go this time of year, summer, and pick up fossils right off the top of mountains that are now exposed because of the melting ice cap. So it's a really, really easy thing to do. I found it remarkable the way the coverage of the 75th anniversary of the firebombing in Dresden happened this week. German news was being very self-reflective in a way we don't quite see in our country anymore by its leadership, acknowledging German role in what happened with the run-up to World War II and World War II itself, but also acknowledging we have some present problems. The right wing is rising up again in Germany, as it is in many other places around the world, and they're changing facts about who the Nazis were and how many people were affected, and trying to turn the victims of Dresden into a victimless kind of a thing. It's a really interesting dynamic that's playing out in Germany. But I appreciate the president's effort to try to broaden both culpability and what we ought to be doing next.
That'd be the president of Germany he's talking about.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, because speaking of that, the other president over here, a day after the Attorney General Barr warned Impetus not to tweet about the Justice Department, the autocrat did just that, declaring that he has the legal right to ask his top law enforcement official to get involved in a criminal case. Oh, this guy's out of control.
Well, the Department of Justice as puppet wing of the Trumpism, and it's another feature that tells us he doesn't know anything about the rule of law, much less does he care.
I think that Barr actually coming out and being critical was just to kind of mask what he's doing.
Everyone says that.
Is carrying out the Trump agenda, and he just is in his pocket a lackey.
Yeah. So it was, what did they say, a marionette, the puppet show.
A marionette.
Some of these guys have to be looking at the end game if, in fact, we succeed in getting him out. What's going to be left of their careers after they've been sycophants for this guy for the last 4 or 5 years?
I can't even begin to guess what goes on in their minds.
You think we would be revengeful like he is?
Oh, really?
No, I don't think we would.
Not
So the
same
question, as we hear more news from China, does a closed autocratic society without freedom of speech and assembly lead to a broader coronavirus outbreak?
Well, we said last week that the Chinese government's handling of this crisis is troubling at best. Well, it's even more so, folks. This week it came out that the Chinese government had not raced to look at all the sickness that was happening at the beginning of this outbreak and recognizing it as coronavirus. And because of that, the numbers of both sick and those who have died jumped this week significantly. And if you see a map, the way that they were showing on the news, all marked with red where the virus is, it's everywhere, including here. And the U.S. is now saying it's sending a charter plane over to Japan to remove the U.S. citizens from that boat, which has got to be a pretty terrible situation to be part of right now. When I'm looking at this and thinking, well, at least it didn't break out in the U.S., where we do not have the rule of law at our disposal right now. We do not have CDC fully empowered, and nor do we have a leader in the White House like we did when Obama took the reins, along with other world leaders, to deal with the breakout in Africa of, why am I forgetting the name? Ebola. 2 years ago. That was a certified worldwide effort, and it was the U.S. led it. And since the U.S. doesn't lead anything positive right now, I'm scared. I'm scared about this virus and the outbreak.
Not in the script, but Cheeto has delayed again aid to Puerto Rico, which has now suffered 200 earthquakes since the beginning of the year. They're still recovering from the hurricane 2.5 years ago, funding for which he is also holding up.
Yeah.
Pretty incredible.
Bright lights. 2 men, 2 women emerged from the pack of Democrats running for president after New Hampshire. Amy and Elizabeth combined for 29% of the higher than expected turnout versus Bernie's 25.7 and Pete Buttigieg's 24.4. It's a big field. So the amount of votes, people were talking about Bernie getting less. We're going to talk about this with Michael in a little minute. But very
That would
interesting.
be our guest, Michael Harrington.
That's right.
In the post-Iowa debacle and the run-up to New Hampshire, there have been some wonderful speeches, and we want to play a little clip right now from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who whooped up the troops pretty well at a Bernie Sanders rally. James, take it away.
Crossroads in our democracy. We're at a key crossroads, and we cannot underestimate the power of hate. We cannot underestimate the power of that divisiveness and the centering and the vitriol and all of that. We cannot underestimate that. And that is why we need to nominate someone with a political revolution at their back, with decades of organizing bringing us to this moment. It is not going to be any one candidate that defeats Donald Trump. It's going to be a movement of Americans that defeat Donald Trump in rejection of hatred and embracing of love.
Go Alexandria or
Ocasio-Cortez.
Thank you. AOC. She's a real gift for us right now, and I like the way she said it's not just one candidate that's going to make it happen. It's a movement. So we this week had our endorsement session in the 49th Ward, put together by Network 49. We used ranked choice balloting for the presidential race, and in that first practice run with that, Elizabeth Warren edged out literally just Bernie Sanders after 4 rounds. What that means is that it took 4 rounds of counting the ballots until someone got over 50%. Clearly, Bernie and Elizabeth were neck and neck, and there were votes also cast for Klobuchar, Buttigieg, and one for Bloomberg, and I think a couple for Biden. So it's very interesting. Others that were supported in that endorsement session were strong support for Kim Foxx and Jacob Meister for clerk of the circuit court, and the MWRD candidates Cam Davis, who was on the show last week, and Ida Corral Sepulveda. So
Okay, now back to the lakefront and the rising waters. After a full court press by alderwomen, mayor, senators seeking feds shoreline help. Guess what? Trump budget does not include funds for plan to prevent further erosion.
surprise,
And Tom had a suggestion for building a trough. Do you want to tell us about that?
Well, we were very famous for turning around the river, and I just think we need to build a trough from the overflow of the lake right down the river to Trump Tower's unrented retail space. There's lots of room right there.
And
We
then
could just-
capillary action would pull the water up to the top of the
Well, we'll
Trump
figure that
building.
one out later, but I just know where there's a lot of empty space that we could fill up with some of this extra water. Store
in his head.
store it for a rainy day or something.
Speaking of Trump in Chicago, just saw that notice that our friend Kari Moe posted on Facebook, but we had it in our wrap anyway. ICE agents in Chicago are planned to be supported by troops.
Yeah, elite border patrol people are being moved into Chicago like kind of SWAT teams to back up ICE people when they go after people.
This
to kind
is-
of give a scary presence.
This is completely unacceptable. People
And then
should
in
be
that text we got, they're talking about tanks.
tanks in Chicago. Not okay. Not okay.
And to Mayor Lightfoot's credit, she was very forceful in rejecting such aid and making it clear that city law prevents the city police or other agencies from cooperating with said armed agents of the federal government. This is all practice for when, after the next election, if he doesn't leave office, what we're going to need to be ready for.
Oh God, you're sounding like Bill Maher. And I agree with Katie Couric last night. She said you're a little obsessed by this, because he is.
Well, it's good some people are raising these real serious concerns, because if it does go that direction, some people will be ready.
Yeah, well, I think we all should be ready for anything at this point.
The mayor has a lot on her plate right now. Some of her early picks for new police chief leaked out, and mostly people seem to be concerned about the names that aren't on that list and how the list came out, because this is supposed to be the new transparent mayor, and it's a tough selection process and all that, but we'll have to see how important police reform shapes up once we start looking for that new police chief. There also was a big demonstration in City Hall where the community benefits folks around the Obama Center aren't happy with the mayor's latest proposal, don't feel there's enough guarantees for affordable housing or to allow existing residents to be able to stay in their neighborhood. Former president seems to be having a little bit of trouble getting his monument built, but we'll see if the aura of the All-Star break that he's in town for helps him in that effort.
And going forward, there will be a press conference for Chicago Juneteenth legislation. Juneteenth is the day that the slaves were freed, and Mayor Lightfoot, along with our alderwoman Maria Haddon, are proposing this becomes a city holiday. So they're getting ready for that, and there will be more on that. They're going to have a press conference on the 19th, 9 a.m. to 10, probably at City Hall. Yes, at City Hall.
Today and the rest of the February, there is something called the Blues Parade, which is a visual book tour of the blues, larger than life, at the Uptown Library, 929 Buena. Now through the 29th of February, you definitely want to check that out. Our friend Terry Abramson has helped put that together, and should be gorgeous. Back to the neighborhood, the recyclery open house, grand celebration of the community and the work we do together is tomorrow, Sunday, February 16th, from 2 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. at the Recyclery at 7628 North Paulina. It is a fundraiser, but it's also a party, and it's called 5th Annual Tailwind for Tools. There's craft and activities, there's snacks, there's a community panel with Equiticity, live music, Divvy for Everyone program launch. Come on up to the Recyclery.
You're listening to Live from the Heartland on WLUW 88.7 FM. Please like us on Facebook, where we have video clips from each week's show.
Someday we'll be together. Oh, and here
We're
we
all
are.
together.
We are together. And we are welcoming once again, but for the first time in a few years, Michael Harrington, our friend, neighbor, and socialist proponent of Bernie Sanders. He's a Bernie Sanders delegate once again, as you were 4 years ago. Welcome back, Michael Harrington.
Thank you. I appreciate the invitation to be here this morning.
Why do you trust Bernie?
Oh, the
Looking at
button
your
I'm wearing.
wonderful
Yeah,
button.
he's got a button on his chest saying, "I trust Bernie."
I trust Bernie. You know, I get asked, and we get asked, those of us who are working for Bernie, why we trust him. And I think one of the most important things to me, we always want to know about a candidate's plans and their proposals and what they say they're going to do. Well, everybody can say and propose and promise. We as voters should look at those proposals, but we also should look at, people overlook, the track record. The track record is the most convincing thing about Bernie Sanders to me. I trust the fact that and know that he's been out there fighting for social justice, fighting for economic justice for years. He was arrested here in Chicago, fighting for anti-discrimination in housing on the South Side. The man has a track record that's we can believe in, and a lot of people believe in that, and that's why he has such huge support. So I trust his track record, and that's convincing.
So I like you 4 years ago when I was also a Bernie delegate. I loved the release of that picture of him chained with other demonstrators while they demonstrated against the Willis wagons, which were the one of the tools that in the
To
tool
keep our
chest.
schools segregated.
Right.
Yes, to keep the schools segregated. And I also, like you said, this is why I like this guy. He's been at this for all these years. He's been on the correct side of justice. Not that you ever considered it, but what do you say edges him out over, say, Elizabeth Warren, who was, those two have a lot of the same support, theoretically, ideologically, as it were. What edges him out?
Well, I think what edges him out is, again, that track record that he has sustained and not wavered from his principles and values. He does not change according to whatever the winds are. He is consistent about the fact that we need to have the 1% pay their fair share, and he points to and specifies it's the corporations and it's the elite and the billionaires and billionaires who've been getting away and buying off our politicians from Congress to the local level so that they get all the benefits. They get their capitalism benefits while we in society don't get our socialism benefits. And there's lots we could have if they were paying their fair share. But their wealth, their largesse is based on people at work, us, regular folk. We put in the work, they get the benefits. Bernie is saying, yeah, we need a revolution, and turning it around. I think that is a major difference between him and Ward or any of the other candidates who have not been on this issue, have not tackled this issue this strongly, or have that track record of history. I don't think they have Bernie's track record.
Mm-hmm. Well, no one can because he's been in office longer than so many of them, right?
That's partly because he's an old guy. And speaking of old guys, I'm a little older than Bernie, I think. But what about the question of age with Bernie and his health? Just because I like to watch these guys and say, hey, if they can be active this old, why don't I just keep doing my stuff? And I'd be curious to know what your take is on, you probably have met Bernie, you probably know him a little bit. How is his health, and how do you think people will react to an old guy as president? Plus being a socialist.
On the health issue, I think it's a legitimate question. But people need to remember and pay attention to the fact that millions of people get a stent inserted to clear up and unclog that artery. Bernie has actually bounced back and is now younger, acting, walking, talking more forcefully and vigorously than he was before he had the heart attack. It's essentially, when you get your pipes cleaned out, you're fresh. Now, what he's going to do, of course, is look for someone who's going to be, as a vice presidential candidate, he's going to look for a successor that's probably going to be a little bit younger, someone that can continue the path that he's breaking for us now. So I trust that.
Who do you think might be a vice presidential choice of Bernie when he becomes the candidate?
I hope it's a woman. I hope we absolutely prepare the path for a woman to be president, and Bernie can do that.
I like that. So you've already mentioned a few things that sort of highlight Bernie's main platform. And you could say more about other issues that are on his platform. How would he achieve some of those platform planks with a split Congress?
I think it's important to think of this as like, you don't get everything overnight, and this is a journey to electing our leadership. We elect a president, but Bernie, of course, as a national leader, will be busy. He's already campaigning right now for progressive senators and representatives, and he just endorsed Kim Foxx here in Cook County. So he's going to be taking a moral stand to help support the election of people who are of this mindset. I think you just don't say that the Senate is the way it is. Well, it's not carved in stone. It's got to change. It's going to change.
God help us. I hope the Senate changes this time.
Because he's going to be supporting, he'll be the president, supporting candidates that are going to support him. He's also said a lot about the fact that we as voters have to stand up and be counted after the presidential election. So we have to be involved in challenging and getting accountability from these elected officials to push the agenda. It's not just Bernie. It's really all of us working together to make this happen.
So what would you say to the folks who generally throw back at that in his many decades in the Senate and the Congress? He has not a lot to show for in terms of co-sponsorship of bills that passed. What do you say to that track record?
I'd say, one, people need to pay. We are informed voters, and I know we know how to go to BernieSanders.com to look up his record and see what he's actually done, because it is, in fact, not true that he's not done anything. And Bernie has accomplished a lot. He provided leadership with Senator McCain on veterans benefits and health, health insurance, I think it is. So he's walked across the aisle when necessary to try and push an agenda. I certainly don't have all the specifics I saw some report that there are 250 some bills that he helped pass when he was in Congress all those years. So people want to say he hasn't done anything. Well, that's not true, because that's what the detractors say.
It's not really specifically that he hasn't done anything. It's looking at that one measurement of, being the chief co-sponsor of bills, which, even last time around, I was having to defend him as well. And you're right, he did a tremendous amount of groundwork always on the left end of the dial, as it were, of any legislation.
And he was in a minority. So
Always.
that has something to do with his ability to get bills passed that he supports.
Yeah, that and also the objection of Democrats having a Democratic Socialist, caucusing with them, but kind of in the old Chicago boss way, saying, yeah, you can be here, but we're not going to pay any attention to you. I think that probably had something to play.
I suspect that one of the part of the appeal of the latecomer Mike Bloomberg coming into this derby is all the money he's bringing and his promise that even if he doesn't get the nod, he would continue to fund a transformation of the Democratic Party. Now, I'm putting words in his mouth because I'm not sure what that transformation means.
I hope he hires you.
Isn't there a need for Bernie Sanders, in fact, to be spending a lot of attention, as you were suggesting before, making sure he gets a Congress he can work with?
Absolutely.
And does the campaign have the resources to actually spread their wings that way, even as he tries to get the nomination?
Actually, that's a good point. Yes, he does. It's funny when you're talking about Bloomberg. Bloomberg, who until recently was a Republican. Anybody who was recently a Republican is not going to get tons of support from me. Bernie has always been a Democrat with a socialist flavor. What kind of money does Bernie have? That's a good question, and I think the money that Bernie has is the money that, again, I go back to it's the money that we have. What kind of electability is something that comes up all the time. And is he electable? Can he get there? Does he have the funding? Does he have the support? Actually, we have to remember this fact, which has not been challenged and is incontrovertible. Bernie has raised more individual donations from voters across this nation than President Trump did. Bernie has raised more donations than all of the other Democratic candidates. Those donations come from people that say, they're investing in Bernie. They're investing in our future. People put their money where their mouth is. Those donations are voters. Those voters are what's going to win the election. He's going to continue to have the support. He's raised more money than any other presidential candidate ever.
Back in 2016, you and our co-host here, Katie Hogan, were delegates for Bernie at the Democratic Convention. This time, you are an area coordinator as well as a delegate to the convention. What's your role, and what do you see? What are you going to be doing and making an impact?
Well, delegates, and we're from the 9th Congressional District, north side of Chicago, all the way up to the northern suburbs, and even with a little stretch that goes out to Des Plaines. Delegates will do a number of things at the Democratic Convention, which is in Milwaukee in July. What Katie and I did 4 years ago when it was in Philadelphia, there are lots of meetings, workshops, and discussion groups with people from around the nation and political leaders. And you're sitting there representing, I will be representing my neighborhood, talking about what people want us to advocate for the Democratic Party to be doing and what we want Bernie Sanders to be doing also. Basically, it's going to be a huge conference, and delegates will be taking votes in favor of this, in favor of that, to oppose this, to oppose that. I'll be there helping do that, and again, representing my neighbors.
Last time, we started out, and all conventions start out with rules committee meetings and platform committee meetings. And Bernie did a lot of work 4 years ago and placed people in the rules committee, and really good, responsible people, and actually affected changes in the rules that we are now seeing 4 years later, some wearing away by the DNC, or trying to play with the superdelegate designation and such. How are you feeling about that? I know that a couple weeks ago it was pretty hairy around Bloomberg entering the race with all his money, and basically people saying he's buying a place on the debate stage.
That's pretty symbolic of the problems with the status of the National Democratic Party, that it is susceptible, that there are individuals and groups susceptible to being bought off, to being paid to do somebody else's bidding rather than our bidding as the citizens and voters. That's a big problem. It continues.
It's still, though, a party that has way more connectivity on the ground compared to the GOP. I mean, the GOP still lives in that place where let's just pretend that the public doesn't care about government and keep them out of it. The Democrats are still, despite all the critiques that people will lay against them, are still trying to be the party of everybody.
Well, I would like to remind people, the Democrats is us. It's real people. And in fact, while we're sitting here right now on the radio station, our volunteers are meeting this morning to go out canvassing in the neighborhood, ringing doorbells, talking to neighbors, giving them the good information about where Bernie stands and what's coming up and what the future could be. We work. We get out and talk to people.
That's
we
right.
don't just use money to buy influence or pay, whether it's political pundits or the news media or the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is people, us.
You're listening to Live from the Heartland on WLUW 88.7 FM. We're talking with Michael Harrington, who's co-chair of Network 49 and a delegate for Bernie Sanders and coordinator of the 9th Congressional District Democrats for Bernie. And I hope that you have good co-chairs that are sending those volunteers out, even as you're on the radio show here. But I want to talk a little bit about you, Michael. I remember hearing your name first with Lakeview Citizens Council, if I recall.
Yes.
You work for the Chicago Teachers Union. You ran for alderman in the 49th Ward, and you've lived in our neighborhood for 25 years. What's changed in your years of activism? Why you still at it?
I'm still at it because, maybe I learned about doing this from my mother, who was a social worker. My mother went out and met people in need every day back then, back in the 50s, where social workers carried diapers and a purse full of money. And they would visit the indigent, poor people, and check on the status of the kids, hand out diapers, hand out money, and then go to the next run. I went, and my brothers and I went with her on some of these trips because she worked on Saturdays and Sundays too, not just Monday through Friday. So that's how I started learning about service to my neighbors
Bless
at an
her
early
heart.
age from Louise Harrington. In high school, I marched against the Vietnam War. I worked with and supported and helped elect Harold Washington and served on his transition team. I've been active in politics for a long time because I believe that justice needs to happen and that I have a right to be involved in decision-making that affects my life. And we do. And I'll continue to do that, and I hope my 2 kids have learned that too.
Yeah, I'm sure they have.
So I want to hone on what's changed in those years of activism and organizing from your
Well,
vantage point.
what's changed? I think more education. That's the number one thing. More awareness of the public of the fact that the status quo that we have right now is not acceptable and we can demand better. There's more people understanding that we can demand better because the fact that Bernie is at the top of the polls is an example of a change.
Right.
I think that's a very good example of what's changed, that we've got a candidate who is saying, it's all of us, not me, it's us.
So the big fear, of course, that is oft stated is if Bernie is not the candidate chosen at the convention, will Bernie voters vote for someone else? How do you speak to that question, which gets raised every day? to me?
Absolutely.
It's a real issue.
No, it's an absolute issue. And I think we will, number one, be working to make sure Bernie is the nominee.
Right.
If
of
it should
course.
happen that he's not, we're going to vote Trump out. No question about that. I intend to do that.
That away, baby. That away. Let's maybe just the last question. I know you made a face when we talked about the ranked choice balloting. Do you have any reaction that you want to share about that first experience with it?
I'd say, we're very used to winner take all, 50% plus one in this nation and in this city. when elections happen, and that's what we're used to. Our Network 49 experiment with ranked choice was very interesting. And I'm not totally, maybe I don't totally understand why it's better. I'm not really sure that the consensus candidate necessarily gives you the best candidate. And we had two, Bernie and Warren were both competing for votes.
Right.
And they came in neck and neck, and Bernie got, 2 votes less than Warren, whatever it is.
Right.
I'm not sold that ranked choice is it right now.
Yeah, I look forward to us debriefing the experience and learning what we have to learn about it. I think it's better when there's like 3 or 4 candidates, not 10 or 13.
Well, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the rest of the process. I mean, this was an interesting turnout
It's okay.
on a snowy evening where community residents came and listened to candidates and asked great questions, bantering back and forth. I actually think one reason it was so tight is that there were some good proponents for both Sanders and Warren in particular. But for some of the other candidates as well, and neighbors listened to other neighbors.
I'm sure that John Fitzgerald won a few votes for Amy.
Sure. Yeah, we have some incredibly very active, involved, informed voters in Rogers Park in the 49th Ward. They're members of Network 49. Katie and I co-chair that. Really proud of the neighbors who actually come out to make democracy happen. Every time we do that, we move the needle a little bit forward.
Amen.
On justice, on all levels, and that's what I like.
And that's going to be the nice way you finish, Michael Harrington. Michael is on the ballot for the 9th CD delegate for Bernie Sanders. He's also been doing for many months now coordinating work for the campaign in the North Side. I salute you, Michael, for your tenacious organizing.
Thank you.
You've been really good, and I certainly hope Bernie gets a chance to thank you personally. You are listening to Live from the Heartland on WLUW Chicago 88.7 FM and WLUW.org. Please like us on Facebook, and we will be right back after this musical break. Okay, so this is Cat Stevens.
Yeah.
Now I've been happy lately, thinking about the good things to come, and I believe it could be something good has begun. Now I've been smiling lately, dreaming about the world as one, and I believe it could be someday it's gonna come. 'Cause out on the edge of dark, there rides a peace train. Oh, peace train, take this country, come take me home again. Now I've been smiling lately, thinking about good things to come, and I believe it could be something good has begun. Oh, peace.
Oh, yeah. Get on the peace train. We actually are so blessed to have a guest sitting here with us now, another Michael Frank of Earwig Records. Welcome back to Live from the Heartland, Michael.
Thank you, Katie.
Maybe we should kick
Great
it
to be
off.
here.
Maybe we can kick it off with the release of Cadillac Baby and Baby's B and Baby Records. The Blues is Here to Stay. Do you have that set up by chance, James? Maybe. No? Okay. Not yet.
Well,
Sorry.
Michael Frank,
Track
we used to
14.
see you at we used to see you up
number
at the Heartland Cafe when Lynn would come in and bring musical guests, and I really didn't realize how much you had been a harp player and been involved in the music. How did you end up coming to Chicago and getting involved with the blues, which we'll get into in greater depth?
I came to Chicago specifically because I wanted to be involved in the blues community, to meet the musicians, South Side, West Side musicians that I'd read about, had so many records of. I wanted to put a face to them, and I was always inspired by their, to me, revolutionary position as blues musicians, just to pursue that required being outside of the norm.
Where did you start? Where were you from?
I was from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Pittsburgh. What's the blues scene like in Pittsburgh?
Nothing like it is in Chicago or Houston or anywhere else that I thought about moving to. But
Well, James was about to bring up the blues is here to stay, so let's let him, because that's we should set the stage, right, Michael Frank?
Set the stage.
Yeah, go ahead, James. Give it a little volume. And there it is.
Some people sit and giggle when they hear the guitar ring. If the band is playing the blues, they try to hide their face in shame, but I don't care what some people say. Just play the blues with the feel, and I know the blues are here to stay. Now there's a new sound born in music every day. If you like the mambo, just go ahead and have your way. I don't care what some people say. Just play the blues with the feel, and I know the blues is here to stay.
All right, that is Eddie Boyd from the 2019 release. How did you decide to produce this multi-disc boxed set? It's an incredible piece of work, beautifully done. The book, the CDs inside of it, etc. How did you decide to produce this?
I decided to produce it after getting to know Cadillac Baby in 1988 through 91. I was pretty early in my days as a record label producer, but I was always drawn to characters like him and to independent small labels. And as I got to know him, he was out of the record business but wanted to get back into it. So I brought him back in the record business doing hip-hop, actually, which neither one of us knew anything about. But we met at a young hip-hop kid, and we decided we were going to make a record with him. Unfortunately, both he and Cadillac Baby died within a few months of each other, although we did make the record, and it is on this box set. But I believed then, and I believed that set me on a path to bring his label back to life, which was a daunting task. And I had a lot of help from and encouragement from Jim O'Neill and Bill Dahl. Jim O'Neill was one of the co-founders of Living Blues.
We used to distribute at Living Blues.
And without his article in 1970 in issue number 6, I would never have known who Cadillac Baby was.
Yeah. And you were, how old of a kid were you when you were reading that article in 1970, and were you still in Pittsburgh?
I was 21.
Yeah.
And I was I was a junior in college, by which time I had a couple thousand LPs, blues LPs.
I had a lot of fun listening to some of the clips that are available on YouTube from this new box set, and it's old style blues, but it's not down south or even Maxwell Street guitar blues. This has a lot of instrumentation in it, kind of beginning to move into R&B, but not quite. Can you talk a little bit about this section of blues that you've picked up on in these discs? And I know I'm talking about maybe one or two of the 4 discs, but the particular segment I went into is this kind of older blues, but lots of instruments.
Well, these musicians were relatively young, but quite accomplished. People like Earl Hooker and Eddie Boyd and L.C. McKinley and some of the others, the Sidemen. They'd been on lots of other recording sessions. They were not just kids starting out.
Right.
So they were already pros. I had a bunch of their records, and their tracks where they were sidemen or leaders in my collection already. So they were quite active. It's just that, like musicians today, they needed to make a living, so they were available.
Yeah.
Have guitar or have bass, we'll
play.
We'll play, right.
Right.
So
There were a lot
I
more
just kind of
labels.
lucked out there in terms of who was on his label.
There were a lot more labels in town than I knew about. I mean, I remember Chess, etc. But Cadillac Babies, B&Baby Records had a run-in with Chess, or Chess basically was not their friend. Can you tell us a little bit about that story for the people who like the nitty-gritty, low-down stuff? That
was kind of interesting story. Cadillac Baby actually was using the same pressing plant that the Chess brothers were using at around 51st and Cottage Grove. And one of the early artists on B&Baby Records was the Daylighters, and Tony Gideon, one of the members of the Daylighters, had a single. He was a great songwriter. He's still active, actually, also in Alabama with his own soul record label. But Tony wrote a song called the Watusi.
The Watusi.
There was another group doing the Watusi, and I forget the name, but Chess was ready to release their single.
The Vibrations?
Yeah, right. That's right. I heard that in Pittsburgh.
James Porter, our engineer, he knows.
So Chess found out from the pressing plant, which I think they had a co-ownership in, that Cadillac Baby was getting ready to release this Watusi record. And Chess, unbeknownst to Cadillac Baby and Tony Gideon, told the pressing plant not to press it.
Ooh.
So Tony Gideon was also learning the record business, hanging out with Cadillac Baby. So they went to the pressing plant to get some singles, and they ran it, Chess met them over there.
Uh-oh.
And they had this meeting, and Chess said, if you put that record out, I'm going to tell the distributors to send it all back to you, which Chess could do, because they had that kind of clout. So Tony Gideon said, and this is in the story of the liner notes, that he was kind of pressured by Cadillac Baby and Doc Oliver, the co-writer of the tune, to sign this paper giving the rights to Chess for that song and the backing side. And Tony protested, but he went along with it. And so the record never came out on B&Baby, but it did come out on Chess. Yeah.
In reading
for $500 also, that was the payoff.
I was going to ask, what they
which
make
Tony
of
did
that?
not get any of. He said
Oh.
Cadillac Baby kept it all.
You mentioned a lot of people, and one of them talk about the blues man James Brewer, and I said, is that the same as Jim Brewer, who I knew as blind Jim Brewer with his wife Fanny, who played on Maxwell Street. I remember we brought him up to Lake Forest College about 1962 or 3, and I just wondered if you wanted to share, because then later he played at the No Exit Cafe a lot.
Regularly.
Well, yes, he
And,
did.
Tell us a little bit about Jim Brewer.
Well, Jim Brewer was from Brookhaven, Mississippi. He was a street singer. He went blind at a really young age, and his father wanted him to have a way to make a living and support himself, so he learned guitar. And he moved to Chicago in the 40s and was very active all the way up until he died, actually, in 1989, playing on Maxwell Street. I met Jim pretty close to the Heartland at Biddy Mulligan's Blues Club. I met him and Honey Boy Edwards the same night in the fall of '72.
And you remember that night?
I remember that night because I became friends with both of them, because bluesmen were very approachable just to talk to. And
Which also means your consciousness was not altered sufficiently not to remember it.
And so
Straight arrow kind of a dude.
So I ended up managing Jim Brewer's career and Honey Boy Edwards' career through the rest of their lives.
And you made them
From
rich.
that night. Well, I took them both to Europe.
Nice.
Jim was afraid of flying, so he only went to one time, even though I had. But I'll just say one more thing about Jim. He did play the No Exit. I used to drive him to the No Exit. He played until they dropped the guarantee from, down to nothing. At which point he said he didn't want to play there anymore, and that really hurt him quite a bit. But he loved playing there, and he wouldn't play that much blues on Maxwell Street because he told me people got too rowdy. So he would play old time music, some traditional country, and some gospel.
One thing, Tom's going to talk, but I just want to say there is an album that I have on the death of President Kennedy that he's on.
That's how I knew who he was before I went to see him at Biddy Mulligan's. I had that record.
In compiling all this music, you discovered some new talent. Can you talk a little bit about Little Faith Taylor?
Yeah, Little Faith Taylor was 11 years old at the time of this recording session in 1959. I did not know who I had never heard of her until I started digging into the history of Bean Baby Records. Bill Dahl and Jim O'Neill probably, especially Bill,
Here we come.
told me about her, and she only made a couple tracks, 2 for Cadillac Baby and 2 for Federal, right? James probably would know that.
So what's playing right now?
I Need Someone to Love Me, and I wanted to play this because as a kid growing up in Pittsburgh, the doo-wop was way more popular than blues, and so that's what I was hearing before Motown and during Motown.
Let's listen to Little Faith Taylor for a few minutes.
Hey, we're back. You're listening live from the Heartland, WLUW 887 Chicago Sound Alliance, and we are here talking with Michael Frank of Earwig Records about his new book, which is a beautiful book, Cadillac Babies, Being Baby Records. Are you still putting out records, Michael?
Yes, I am, although in recent years I've slowed down to a few every other year. Just
When you say records, are you talking vinyl?
well,
Or
I'm really thinking seriously about doing a couple of my early releases on vinyl. The Jelly Roll Kings and Old Friends and Jack Johnson and Jimmy Dawkins would be the ones.
Oh, Jimmy Dawkins. We had him at a Rising Up Angry show way back.
And doesn't surprise me. He had this demeanor that seemed like he was angry all the time.
Well, that was the name of the organization, but it was at the Midland Hotel.
But I'm interested. There's a lot of great music being made now, but my interest is in historic preservation, more so with a few exceptions. So I'm focusing on reissues, although they won't all be in a book like this. But I've got some stuff from 1989, 1990, from a Brazilian soundtrack called Blues, Pain Created to Heal Pain. I have the soundtrack rights to that.
Wow.
It's quite an amazing collection
I'd like
of people.
to hear that every day.
And things like that. It's 40 years as a label. I'll be doing some kind of reissue, but of the artists, but it'll probably be recordings that I'd never released before, like from Honey Boy Edwards' 90th birthday at Hot House. I had a lot of musicians on that, and I have an audio of that. And so things like that are keeping true to my mission, but had not been done and probably wouldn't be done by anybody else.
It'll be exciting if you get some of that stuff out.
Michael, Michael Robert Frank, you also have one of our friends as a contributor on this, Robert Marovich, who's the guy who follows us on WLUW.
He's sitting there behind the glass over
Yeah,
there,
we
getting
see
ready
him.
for his show.
Hey.
You received a bit of criticism about the inclusion of rap. You want to talk about what that is and what's your... Yeah, just talk about that for a second.
Well, I'm not surprised that I would have received criticism. on that. A lot of blues fans
Don't
like the music, although the enlightened ones realize that it's part of the continuum of the African American expression. And this was a really talented kid. It was the last Richard Davenport 3D, and he was the last guy that Cadillac Baby worked with. Cadillac Baby and I actually were in the studio together. Both of our signatures are on the contract with Richard. We both decided to record him, and he was a really talented kid, which shows to me that Cadillac Baby was progressive. He was an entrepreneur, an opportunist, but he was also very progressive in the music that he appreciated. You know, he loved jazz too. And if you listen to some of the tracks that are R&B, there's some great jazz players on there. So I just felt it's part of the story, part of the journey, part of the history of Chicago's music, and that the hip hop belonged on that record as part of the Bean Baby Records story.
I appreciate your collecting all this historical work, but what's the blues scene like today in Chicago? Where do you go to listen, or do you have to go out of town? You have to go down to Memphis with Linda.
Actually, it's a lot harder to hear blues like I put on this box set, traditional blues in the older 60s styles now in Chicago. If I'm going to the black community, there are only a few choices that are known, which is Linda's Place at 1054 or 1044 West 51st Place, only on Monday nights. Fantastic Elroy and the Bulletproof Band, great musician, great singer from Clarksdale, Mississippi. And I go to the Odyssey over East, 99th and Torrance, which has blues. It's really blues and soul music. Great musicians in there too, on Friday night and Sunday night.
But do you have an active website?
I do have an active website, earwigmusic.com. Earwig is the blues bug that everybody loves to hate, because when you mention earwig, they go, ick. But the music grabbed a hold of me like the earwig does, and went in my ear, and it stayed there, and it just expanded from there, and so that's why it...
His head is shaking.
And
We've been talking with Michael
won't come
Frank
out.
of Earwig Records as he tries to empty it out of his head. He has put out this wonderful Cadillac Babies Bean Baby Records definitive collection, and we're going to go out listening to Dynamite by Earl Hooker on the guitar and Detroit Jr. on the piano. Thank you so much for joining us, and good luck with the book.
Thank you.
We want to thank everyone who makes this show possible. Lynn Orman, James Porter, Xiaohu, and my co-hosts. Welcome back, you guys. Next up, stay tuned for Bob Maravich doing Gospel Memories, then Voodoo Party with James Porter. Do good in the world.
The world needs all the good
that we do. All power to the people.